Hello, friends. It's Dr. John WorldPeace JD coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico, the uh, land of enchantment, UFOs, and the atomic bomb. We're going to talk today about the ownership of Joe Biden and all the bad acts of Israel in Gaza. I want to remind you there is a text of this commentary below. Contribute, like, subscribe to the channel. Dr. John WorldPeace JD. Friends, this is Dr. John WorldPeace JD, the only global advocate for peace, officially since 1988 when I changed my name, and the only advocate for Jesus Christ, as referenced in John 14:25. You have to be totally blind not to see the increasing tension in the world human society since Notre Dame nearly burned down between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday 2019. That was followed by COVID, officially acknowledged in December of 2019. And if you paid attention after COVID, nothing Trump did worked out for him, most particularly the 2020 presidential election. Then he initiated the January 6th insurrection. None of his lawsuits have worked out in his favor, and there's a lot of them. Hard to keep track of so many, but they are all racing to the finish line this year. Today, there's going to be a ruling on whether he has 100% immunity against criminal prosecution for anything he did while president. In short, he claims to be above the law. And for the last year, he talks more and more like a mafia boss or dictator. What I'm pointing out is that since December 2019, there's been an ongoing increase in chaos in America and the world. Mass shootings happen almost weekly now. This week, one of the biggest storms in the U.S. is going to play out. More and more states are getting involved in questions of whether Trump can be removed from the 2024 election ballot. The Supreme Court tried to avoid the issue, but last week was forced to set a hearing for February 8th to resolve the issue for every state. But the most critical matter for the United States and Joe Biden is South Africa filing for a hearing in the International Court of Justice regarding Israel's committing genocide in Gaza, the West Bank, and the Palestinian territories. Let me tell you something. They've been doing this since 1948, and every president has supported them. They've murdered untold numbers of people. These people are as radical as any Islamist regime like Iran as you can imagine. You know, America has become so money-oriented and openly racist that few people believe in God enough to follow the teachings of Jesus. Jesus was a radical liberal left teacher, and the foundation of his message was to feed the hungry, heal the sick, shelter the homeless, or go to hell. That said, Donald Trump constantly curses the radical liberal message of Jesus, and Christians just ignore these comments. The reason is because no one talks about it, most especially evangelical and fundamentalist preachers. The news and social media totally ignore it. Abortion is now outlawed in many states. Here again, we have people that are clueless about the issue. Americans want to stop abortion, but they don't want to write the checks to support these unwanted kids. The abortion issue is purely a religious issue, and the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction in making rulings on it because of separation of church and state prohibition in the Constitution. The evangelicals churches are losing members because they have no workable answers to how to decrease the chaos in America and the world. My job this life is to increase the level of peace in the world human society, and part of that being the only advocate for Jesus Christ, John 14:25. No one has challenged me on this. My job is to put Christians back in sync with the true teachings of Jesus. Let me give you an example of people ignoring the truth about Israel. First, Israel claims to be the chosen nation, chosen people of God. Now let's look at the facts. In 32 CE, the Zionists chose Barabbas, a criminal, over Jesus, who was then crucified for saying he was the Son of God. When this happened, the veil in front of the Holy of Holies was torn in two, which was a sign that God, who resided in the Holy of Holies in Israel, abandoned Israel. In a word, the Zionists were no longer the chosen nation, people of God. So let us look at what has happened since Jesus was crucified. In 72 CE, the Romans razed Jerusalem, razed the second temple of Solomon, and drove the Jews out of Israel, and they were dispersed throughout the world, human society, because they had no homeland. This is referred to as the Jewish diaspora. Then in 600 CE, with the rise of Muhammad and the religion of Islam, God allowed the Muslims to take possession of the land of Israel and build the Dome of the Rock shrine and the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, where the Temple of Solomon existed before the Romans razed it to the ground. Then, 1095 to 1300, the Catholic Christians mounted several crusades to take Jerusalem from the Muslims. For a few years they had control, then lost it again. If you believe in God, God was defending the Muslims' possession of Israel, now called Palestine, and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. 200 years of attacking the Muslims to take over Jerusalem by the Christians did not work out. Then in the 1930s and 40s, God allowed the Nazis to exterminate 6 million Jews. I think it's impossible to argue that the Jews are the chosen people, nation of God, since they crucified Jesus. Jesus was a Jew and never made any efforts to start a new religion, but what Jesus brought about was a new sect of Judaism. It consisted of the Jews who began to follow Jesus and eventually were referred to as Christians, as they built a distinct new Jewish sect that acknowledged the Old Testament of Judaism but was more oriented to the New Testament and the church created by the Apostle Paul in Rome, where he died. The Catholics say Jesus told Peter to build the church, but that was not true. The foundation of Christianity was in Rome, where Paul laid out the Christian corporate religion. Paul was a Roman and very educated, and Peter was an uneducated fisherman who really had a hard time understanding what Jesus was talking about. In the late 1700s, the United States of America was founded, and it was formed mostly by Christians. It was a Christian movement. Now, the foundation of America is one of inclusiveness of all religions, all races, all nationalities, and all genders. America has been blessed by God to the extent that all over the world people want to come here. There is no melting pot nation in the world that accepts all races, all religions, all nationalities, and all genders except America. Therefore, the chosen nation, people of God, has become America. The Nazis had a slogan: one people, one nation, one Fuhrer. The Zionists have a similar slogan: one people, one nation, one God. The Jews are an exclusive, elitist community. Now, due to the intense focus of the Jews in the late 1800s to reestablish a nation of Israel globally, they've accomplished that goal. After World War II in 1948, President Harry Truman backed Israel to form a nation in Palestine, but Palestine was fully occupied by the Palestinian Muslims for 1,400 years. No boundaries were set for Israel, and the UN did not designate a nation for Palestinians. There has been nothing but chaos in Palestine and the Middle East since Israel became a nation whose primary backer has been the USA. Without the USA backing, there would be no Israel. The United States Nations has the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states in Article 15 that everyone, all humans, have the right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality nor denied the right to change his nationality. The United Nations created the nation of Israel, but never created a nation of Palestinians. The nation of Israel was carved out of the Palestinian territories, and the Jews are determined to turn all the Palestinian territories into the nation of Israel, leaving Palestinians without a nation. The Israels presently have an apartheid nation with second-class citizenships for Palestinians who refuse to leave the Palestinian territories the Jews were arbitrarily claiming since 1948. The goal of the Zionists is to ethnically cleanse all the Palestinian territories of Palestinians who have occupied it for 1,400 years. Now here's some truth that no one talks about, mostly because they are ignorant of it. In order for God to forgive the Jews for crucifying the Messiah, Jesus Christ, God made a covenant with the Jews to be forgiven with the sacrifice of 6 million Jews to the Nazis, and then after World War II, the Jews would become radical, global defenders of human rights. That was the deal. But what happened was the Jews turned their nation of Israel into a more radical and fascist nation than the Nazis. All the Jews did was learn from the Nazis and then copy it. Over 75 years, the Jews have committed genocide against the Palestinians with the goal of taking over all of Palestine and purging it of all Palestinians. In 2018, the Jews declared Israel to be a nation of Jews for Jews in its nation-state law. The nature of the law is a declaration that Israel is an apartheid nation. The question is whether Israel, as a Jewish state that protects and celebrates Jewish identity, and a liberal democracy that protects the rights of all minorities, including non-Jews. Answer: I cannot. So the Jews broke their covenant with God. Now, after 75 years of establishment of Israel, the South Africans have determined to become the global defenders of human rights, and they have begun with their bringing Israel to the International Court of Justice, and a hearing is being held on January 11th. The Zionists are doing what they have been doing for 75 years, putting on a global push to ignore the truth about Israel. The South African filing was a sudden move and caught Joe Biden off guard. Joe Biden had reacted as always, as has his predecessor presidents since Harry Truman, and backed Israel right or wrong. Well, the atrocities, the Zionist Holocaust in Gaza, not a war, has been brutal since October 7th when Hamas killed 1,200 Jews in Israel. A murderous event. But Jews have been killing Palestinians since 1948, 75 years, way more than 1,200. Since then, the Zionists have killed 22,000 Gazans and injured 75,000 more, of whom are women and children. They have virtually leveled all of Gaza and displaced the entire population of 2 million, in addition to starving them, blowing up their hospitals, schools, homes, no clean water, no fuel, communication with the outside world is cut off, and the Jews have told them safe places to go, and then they bombed them there. The Zionists have lost about 200 soldiers in this process, and until South Africa filed their complaint, Israel has not stopped their Holocaust. The Zionists call their Holocaust a war. The Jews claim to be the chosen people of God, and Palestine, the old Israel, was given to them by God, and that's true, until they crucified Jesus. The Jews hate Christians as evidenced by their bombing of Bethlehem on Christmas Eve 2023. Radical Zionist Jews refer to Christians as the people of the dead God, meaning Jesus. The Zionists have also increased their Holocaust in the West Bank and against the Palestinians in the Palestinian territories through their settlers, 300,000 of which are American Jews. There's an example in the Old Testament about God cursing of Cain for the murder of his brother Abel. The Muslims are the progeny of the first son of Abraham, Ishmael, and the Jews are the progeny of Isaac, the second son of Abraham. The Zionists have been murdering the Muslims for 75 years without substantial rebuke from America, if any. In fact, American presidents have protected the bad acts of the Jews against the Palestinians. Both the Jews and the Muslims are Semitic people of Abraham. The Zionists are the most vicious of anti-Semitic people based on their ongoing murder of the Palestinians. The Jews have tried to claim all acts against them are anti-Semitism, but their acts against the Palestinian Muslims is not anti-Semitism. I'm against Zionists who are right-wing Israelis. I'm against I'm against neo-Nazis and white racists in America, but not against Germans in America. I am anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. The acts of the Zionists are an abomination to God and to all truly democratic people of the world human society. In conclusion, I've heard the voice of the Lord, and he is warning Joe Biden not to run interference for the Zionists in the UN processing of the South African suit against the Zionists in the International Court of Justice. God is angry enough that a second diaspora of the Jews is on the table. Joe Biden, protecting the Zionist Holocaust, is pouring blood on not only his head and hands, but on every American whose president he is. America will also suffer as Joe Biden will suffer if he runs interference for the Jews. on the South African motion in the International Court. If Biden does try to justify the Zionist Holocaust in Gaza, the West Bank, and Palestinian territories, he will have to answer to God, even as all of America will be punished and may be abandoned by God, as God has abandoned Israel. Let those who have eyes see and those who have ears hear. This is Dr. John WorldPeace, the only advocate for Jesus Christ, John 14:25, and the only global advocate for peace and world peace. We are at an inflection moment, a watershed moment. It is time for the American presidents and the American people to stop supporting the bad acts, anti-Semitism, genocide, crimes against humanity of the Israeli Zionists against the Palestinians. Have a good day.